what you get out of it at the end. I don't really understand as much as I would like about why that's true, but I think it has something to do with all of these concepts within Islam that I've been elaborating. And I'm heartened in my suspicion by the presence of comments throughout the Islamic tradition that indicate I'm onto something, and that the lessons I'm beginning to learn from all of you are valuable. Now, whether this is a good translation of the original, I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that it's a particularly accurate translation, because I doubt that the phrase entrepreneurial success really exists at the time that this gentleman was writing. But I don't really know how to get the original, so I'm looking forward to investigating that further. Perhaps one of you can help later on. So I hope I've given you some sense of why the challenge of thinking about entrepreneurship inside the particular social concept of Islam gives a very different understanding to the nature of entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be the way we do it in the States. It doesn't have to be the way we do it in Europe. The way you do it here in Malaysia is different than the way you do it in Saudi, but at least unified and consistent along Islamic socio-cultural values. And anyone trying to understand success in entrepreneurship in a place like Malaysia will have to understand the Islamic context first and the entrepreneurial concepts second. Now, I want to turn quite briefly to the very last point I'm going to make, which is about intrapreneurship. And it's a very simple point. Intrapreneurship equals entrepreneurship. I think if I were giving a talk about entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship in the UK, I would stress differences. But it seems to me that those differences are far less important here, certainly in Johor Corporation and probably more generally throughout the Islamic world. The values that I've been discussing have a great deal to do with collective decision-making, with supportive networks, with understanding the role of community and shared values in enabling entrepreneurship. So intrapreneurship is essentially entrepreneurship that occurs inside a supporting environment where there is a shared set of values. And I could go into this in a great deal more detail. I have laid out a few ideas, but I don't think it's worth elaborating on them too much. The basic point is just that there's not much reason to distinguish between entrepreneurship out in the cold versus intrapreneurship within the comforting environment of a larger corporation, if an entrepreneur out in the cold is actually supported by the environment of the shared Islamic sociocultural values that he or she is operating in. In other words, the corporation is equivalent to the community, and an entrepreneur is always operating inside a community. There are concepts in economics that would probably put more flesh onto the skeleton of this notion, aspects of competitiveness, of the notion of monopoly as it is understood in Islam, of various factors of consumption and production, as well as the kinds of things that you can trade in. But I think I will leave those concepts for a little later. If you have interest, we can discuss them in questions and answers. Now, let me also jump to a set of final reflections, and then I'll turn it over to you if you have any questions you'd particularly like to pursue. Basically, what I've been talking about is entrepreneurship in society. Mostly in the West, we talk about entrepreneurship as if there were no such thing as society, and that's where we go wrong. The entrepreneur in the West is an individual. The entrepreneur in an Islamic world is a member of a community. We can see in the West where we are starting to be more communal in our understanding of entrepreneurship, higher general success rates. I think there's a lot of evidence that's starting to come in that supports that assertion. And we can certainly see in other social contexts more generally successful rates of entrepreneurial activity where there is this sense of social support. I want to try to support that argument by just telling a brief sort of tale. If you think about economic development most generally, economic activity, commercial activity, entrepreneurial activity, where there is growth in an economy. In the West, at least, this used to come mainly from either government or corporate activity. If you look back at the economic history of most of Europe and America, you see that the biggest players in any economic game are always either the government, because they have dependable tax revenue to finance activity, or corporations, because they have publicly traded shares to finance their operations. Now, that used to be true. It's probably not true so much anymore, especially not after the recent financial collapse. In fact, for the most part, at least in the U.S., the bulk of economic activity now is in startups, not in long-established companies. In fact, there is some evidence that entrepreneurs are actually the only people creating jobs in the U.S. economy right now. Entrepreneurs who are just basically able to operate no matter what the environment is doing around them. Where do these entrepreneurs come from? Why are there so many of them in certain areas and not others? Well, there are basically two ways of developing more entrepreneurs, and beyond that, developing an economy generally. You can either grow your own or import them from outside. You grow your own entrepreneurs by providing education and training. You import from outside by allowing immigration or by yourself expanding to new environments. This is as true of a country as it is of a corporation or any other form of social organization. The consequence of developing entrepreneurial activity inside a system is growth. So for Johor Corporation, for example, or for the nation of Malaysia, the more entrepreneurial activity, the better. And the importance of understanding how to promote that entrepreneurial activity in a way that is socially appropriate becomes extremely obvious. I can illustrate how you can go wrong with this and how you can go right in a very simplistic way by pointing to two particular cases. I don't know if there are any Uzbeks in the room, but I'm about to pick on Uzbekistan. It's a really unfair fight to pit Uzbekistan against the states. But I choose Uzbekistan because it is nominally, or on the face of it, a Muslim country, an Islamic environment. But it is not a successful entrepreneurial one. And I choose the U.S. because it is not an Islamic environment, but it is a very successful entrepreneurial one. I thought it would do, in conclusion, just to point to what's going on in both of these places that actually might illuminate where to get the most out of combining the two enabling factors of Islam and entrepreneurship. So just to look at Uzbekistan for a few seconds. Has anyone been there? Anyone in the room been to Uzbekistan? It's truly beautiful in a sort of mystical way, lots of crumbling mosques and swooning minarets, but also some very new modern buildings in Tashkent. I don't know if you can see the map. It's actually quite a large country. People think of it, if they think of it at all,